Let me welcome all of you on behalf of Faith for Earth to the second thematic consultation in the run-up to COP28. My name is Matthias Böning. I'm with the World Evangelical Alliance Sustainability Center. I'm based in Bonn, where yesterday the SB 58 kicked off the intersessionals. So this this preparation process to COP28 is in full swing, and delegates are at this very moment discussing and negotiating just a couple of 100 meters away from where I am. So this puts us directly into our topic for the day. I welcome all of you. Thank you for your interest in the faith-based thematic consultations in the preparation process for COP28. We had a wonderful first session on COP28 priorities a couple of weeks ago. Some of you might have been able to also participate in that session. We had over 170 participants, so that was a great session. And we are expecting another great session today when we will focus on loss and damage and climate justice. So what are the expectations on this topic for COP28? What difficulties and obstacles we might encounter in this thematic field. So while we are, I guess, still waiting for Alvin Chandra from UNEP, who is our main speaker in this session, let me already introduce him to you. He is the Global Coordinator for Adaptation Policy and Partnerships at UNEP, and he also oversees the Global Adaptation Network. So he's an expert in his field and a practitioner at the same time when it comes to the topics of loss and damage and adaptation policy. And we are very much looking forward to having him in this session. He has focused much of his work on loss and damage, including coordinating UNEP's partnership and programs with the Green Climate Fund. He facilitated the loss and damage stream of negotiations for the UNFCCC Secretariat. So he is a very knowledgeable person to share with us today about loss and damage and climate justice. But in order to share, we also need him to be part of this room. So we are still waiting for him to come. So while we are waiting, maybe let me ask if we have any SB 58 participants among us. Is there anyone who is currently in Bonn or closely connected with Bonn? There are also some virtual sessions. If so, please raise your hand, and we are happy to listen to you for a moment. Is anyone currently dealing with the SB 58 in Bonn? Okay. Nobody here in this room. So the intersessionals have just started yesterday, and they will last for the next 10 days, this week and next week. And as you know, this is a very important preparation step towards COP28, and expectations are high. And what we've heard so far is that with the usual problems involved, but that discussions are moving forward at least. So we will see hopefully some good results. It's much too early to say anything about the outcomes or about the results of the SB 58.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Matthias. And thanks everybody for coming yet again for another thematic session discussion. I hope we can get Alvin as soon as we can. As Arne mentioned, he is already inborn with the discussions, but he promised to be with us. So hopefully he will show up. However, as probably some of you heard me saying last time, that we wanted to raise the profile of faith participation at intergovernmental meetings. And as we have had successes earlier during the United Nations Environment Assembly, during the Stockholm Plus 50 preparations, and during COP26, which was in partnership with the Vatican, the British government, and the Italian government, where we had a series of consultation meetings before going to the COP, where an interfaith statement was issued and was submitted to the president of COP26 at that time. And it's still having high level of interest by everybody, and is being referred to as the forum that brought faith and religious leaders and actors together. So again, this year, we wanted to follow suit and maximize our cooperation. At that time, the consultations were done with only high-level faith leaders. This time, we're doing a double track or a parallel track, one with high-level faith leaders, and hopefully, we're working on organizing a high-level faith leaders meeting. Could be at the Vatican, but we're still discussing that before COP28. So that track is already in taking place. Another track is the general consultation with the people who are actually doing the work and who are doing the advocacy and engagement and, writing and building the capacity of their congregations and their partners. So this is part of it. We have constituted an interfaith coordination group, which is represented by almost 20 or 25 faith-based organizations who are very much concerned with climate change. So we have bi-weekly meetings to discuss the preparations, the pre-COP preparations, such as this one, but also the Faith Pavilion. And it is great and delightful to inform you that a Faith Pavilion has been provided by the Muslim Council of Elders, which will run from, I think, 30th of November until the 12th of December in Dubai. It will be in the Blue Zone, and we are designing the discussions at the pavilion. We will be sending out an expression of interest to all organizations who are willing to be part of the pavilion and conduct or run a session or a side event or a cultural event or what have you related to their religions and their work. So that is hopefully going out of our email system in the next couple of days. So in parallel or in line with this is these thematic discussions. The first one was discussing the priorities of COP28, whether they were the priorities of the president of COP28 or the priorities of the UN or the priorities of UNFCCC. So, and we have had Mr. Nicholas Hegelberg, who is the lead climate change expert within UNEP, who has given us very good food for thought on the priorities and how we can engage. Today, we are supposed to be having Alvin. Alvin, as introduced by Matthias, is the lead person on loss and damage within UNEP. This is a matter that is very important on the agenda of the COP. It was approved as a principle for the creation of the Loss and Damage Fund. However, there are so many other pending issues related to the Loss and Damage Fund. Who funds it? Who pays? Who receives? What are the conditions? Are they part of ODA? They're not part. Are they fresh money or already committed money? What does it include? Does it include only issues related directly to climate change or biodiversity and ecosystems and pollution? Because they are all interlinked. So that we hope to hear from Alvin more about this. So the consultation series will continue. We're aiming at having a consultation meeting on a monthly basis. Probably sometimes we will have to have 2 per month according to the number of sessions. And we will be addressing the what they call the sticky points or the points of importance that will be discussed during the COP28. Our objective is not just capacity building and knowing what everybody is talking about. It is actually rather engagement of faith actors now before we get to COP28. So we are hoping that you and through you, faith leaders and those who are influential to get in touch with negotiators in your countries, in your regions, and start discussing with them what the faith community is looking for in such discussions and what are the aspirations that we want out of these discussions. As you know, we focus and we stress on the moral and spiritual responsibility of nations and of individuals and of leaders to be at the forefront, not only their economic and social priorities, but also where we want to take the future of the people and how we should look at things and issues relating to the issues of COP28. I happily see Alvin now online. Matthias, back to you.
Thank you very much, Iyad. I mean, in the end, it's also good to take this time to share once and twice about the process we're standing in and about the opportunities we jointly have, because in the end, this preparation process is also about us coming together and doing something together and really taking it from calling to action to meaningful action by ourselves. So thanks, Iyad, for re-emphasizing this, and a warm welcome to Alvin. Chandra, I hope you can hear us and see us. You are connecting from Bonn, right in the middle of SB 58. So thank you very much for joining. And I've already introduced you multiple times. So everyone on the call knows who you are, that you're the Global Coordinator for Adaptation Policy and Partnerships at UNEP. And we are eager to listen to you and learn more about loss and damage and climate justice. And you are a very apt person to present on this topic, as you have been facilitating the loss and damage stream of negotiations for UNFCCC. And at this point, let me hand over to you, Alvin. And depending on, thanks. And yeah, depending on how long you take, but take your time. we can maybe have a couple of questions as we then finish at the top of the hour. Over to you, Alvin.
Thank you, Matthews, for the introduction, and my apologies, colleagues and friends. I am in the midst of the Substa 58, and of course, loss and damage is front, right, and center of the conversations here at the SBs leading to COP28. As you know, the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh had agreed to set up a fund and new funding arrangements that would enable scale up of finance, particularly to address climate-induced loss and damage affecting the most vulnerable countries. As part of this, a transitional committee has been set up to lead the development of fund and funding arrangements. And the transitional committee has been meeting in the midst in the year. They do have a very it's a huge task in terms of setting up a fund at a short scale, but also in a new financial architecture. So when and one of the things, Matthew, is that in terms of addressing the scale of loss and damage, what we are seeing as UNEP has kept on highlighting this, is that it's happening in a landscape where adaptation is becoming much more urgent and immediate in terms of the scale of finance, but also the type of assistance. We are already beginning to see the hard and the soft limits to adaptation in the most vulnerable countries. So speaking from the context of small island developing state, where I come from the Pacific, we're beginning to see that there are some limitations in terms of how much communities can adapt to in terms of sea level rise, in terms of the intensity scale of tropical cyclones, in terms of the non-economic dimensions or types of losses, particularly that related to loss of biodiversity, nature, and the cultural loss and the loss of identity. And this is basically the forefront of conversations around climate justice for the most vulnerable. So in terms of the setup of the fund, climate justice is very much at the forefront. Part of my role, apart from the lead negotiator for UNEP in terms of coordinating loss of damage, I also support the transitional committee in terms of the technical elements of the setup of the funds. As you know, the Secretary General's priority is that the fund is set up and established as soon as possible. And as part of that, UN agencies have pledged its support to technically support the establishment of the fund. So very quickly, what this really means is that now we are setting up a fund in a new architecture where there's humanitarian response, where there's disaster response, we have existing adaptation efforts, and countries are finding it very hard to access funds. That's one of the things to support response to climate action. The second thing is that the frontline communities, particularly local communities, local organizations, they have a challenge in terms of accessing funds. Countries also want direct access to climate finance that addresses the speed, the scale, intensity of disasters and climate-related events, but also direct channels. And the direct channels to access the funds are quite, have been missing in the architecture. But at the same time, we're beginning to see countries that are, particularly LDCs and those that are already suffering the impacts of disaster and climate, getting into a cycle of death just to respond from one climate event to another, which means that countries like Sierra Leone, like Malawi, Madagascar, many countries, they're basically accessing loans after loans just to recover. There isn't enough time to actually recover from one disaster when they have to look at another, address another disaster. Then, of course, the scale and the intensity. You have countries like Tuvalu and Kiribati that are on the front line, and Maldives, where they're a front line of impacts, and they're thinking about relocation of the most vulnerable communities and moving them to safe grounds. and the kind of finance that is needed is easily something, you know, in the scale of billions to actually look at mobility options, migration, planned relocation. You know, we already are beginning to see a large scale of internally displaced population as a result of environment, conflicts, and climate. So the expectation then for COP28 is that the recommendations are made by the transitional committee in terms of the setup of the fund. What new financing arrangements would be, you know, considered in this financial architecture that doesn't put countries in further debt? And that is at the forefront of many of the arguments from LDC countries that grant-based instruments are used to support this. And then the last thing is that we need to enable the frontline communities to adapt, at the same time deal with the recurrent losses and damages, both economic and non-economic, and that these funds are basically has a mechanism in place or arrangement in place where funds are very expediently accessed to the frontline communities. I'll stop over there. Very quickly, UNEP's role in this is quite crucial. We bring in the element of nature restoration, climate services technology, and early warning systems. These are, you know, these are some key building blocks in terms of building resilience and adaptive capacity of communities, but at the same time, through our convening power of non-state actors, we also bring in these partnership arrangements and ideas around how non-state partners can be part of addressing loss and damage. Thank you, Matthias.
Thank you, Alvin. First of all, for your presentation here. And I have a direct a question to you, and then colleagues, please also be prepared with your questions. You can already raise your hand, or you can also put your questions into the chat. I will read them out for everyone. But Alvin, speaking of the process that lies ahead, could you let us know, as you're also facilitating or co-facilitating this this transitional committee process, what are the next steps leading up to COP28 now? What work program lies ahead of you for the rest of this year?
So the transitional committee will be meeting. They have a workshop scheduled in July, looking at fund and funding arrangements for loss and damage, and would like, of course, hear from non-state partners in terms of good practices and what the fund should and how such arrangements should be put in place. Two other meetings will be convened, including a possible ministerial, and then the transitional committee puts recommendations to the conference of parties, which will be in Dubai, hosted by the COP28 in December, with recommendations around the setup of fund and funding arrangements. I think, you know, one of the crucial elements of the transitional committee in this process is around what are the new areas or possible areas and channels of funding that would be put in place, and the recommendations, the kind of recommendations that would put for the COP28. In addition to that, there is a separate process outside of the funding arrangement, which is the setup of the Santiago network. And very briefly, the Santiago network for loss and damage agreed in the Madrid COP this is COP25 on top of my head. I can't remember, but yeah, Madrid COP. And the key thing is that this network will catalyze technical assistance at the SBs. It is expected that the host for the Secretariat for the Santiago network will be discussed, and a recommendation will be put forward to COP28, where we would see a possible agency that would be in a position to host the Santiago network. So in addition to finance, countries have been asking for technical assistance. The Santiago network is a key arm and a pillar for the support.
And remind us again, sorry, about what exactly the Santiago network is, just for everyone again, for the context.
Okay, so the Santiago network was born out of the Madrid COP. The most vulnerable countries have been requesting for enhanced technical support, particularly to address extreme slow onset events, looking at addressing knowledge gaps related to loss and damage, looking at ways to enhance addressing of loss and damage. So in addition to the technical assistance that UN agencies provide, the Santiago network would catalyze and mobilize additional support to addressing loss and damage, because the scale, the pace, the ferocity and intensity of climate change is just so aggravated. And considering the moderate to high climate scenarios, such a network would be able to mobilize technical assistance quickly.
And maybe to add in my own words, as we are convening as faith actors here, the way I understood the Santiago network is also that it works closely with UNDRR, the disaster risk reduction unit of the United Nations. And it's all about, or not all about, but a big part of it is actually counting what is lost and counting what is damaged and measuring what is damaged. So it's a lot about data. A lot about data gathering, and there's actually a huge chance for faith groups, which are everywhere around the world on the grassroots level, to join into this huge data collection effort that is needed in the end also to make any loss and damage funding mechanism meaningful and just and correct, if I'm not mistaken, but please correct me if there's something to add on this.
Indeed, as part of monitoring of loss and damage in countries, UN assistance have been mobilized in terms of setting up loss and damage database through disaster risk reduction efforts and part of reporting under the Sendai. The point that I want to get to, Matthews, is that many post-disaster risk assessments are happening. They're able to, quantify certain costs. But my observation is this post-disaster risk assessments are very monetary focused. Many of the non-economic elements, particularly loss of biodiversity, loss of cultural values, loss of identities, it's hard to put, loss of lives. It's hard to put a dollar value on this. And so the role of civil society is quite important, and faith-based organization in terms of bringing out the non-economic dimensions of loss. And just to cite a research we've done in the Pacific Islands, one of the key losses, apart from economic assets, was the loss of identity as a result of degradation of coasts, degradation of biodiversity, people's identity. I come from Fiji. Our identity is very much tied to the land. Once land is gone, your identity, is lost as well. So these are the types of losses that people are incurring. And currently, there's no funding mechanism to actually support this. What does it mean? In Kiribati, you go and you see that many of the burial grounds are now underwater. Eventually, if support could be provided to actually relocate these burial grounds, relocate some of the settlements, also noting limited space in atoll countries, that being a challenge, that's where the support could be. Then dealing with the issue of mental health and psychology. Communities in Vanuatu, impacts after impacts have ravaged, and there is a pertinent support to actually help with the mental health of population. What does it mean? Setting up networks of women's group who are able to talk through, who are able to deal with harm associated with disasters and climate. So that's the kind of support that is needed in the mental health space. So yeah, yes, in terms of quantifying, in terms of putting a dollar value, but also the non-economic dimensions of loss as well. I do see a question over here. What is the annual budget foreseen for the fund, and what countries are supporting, which are opposing or delaying? It's hard to say what the budget of the fund would be, but the idea is that this will be a fund of a fund, that this fund would be able to support other funding arrangements that in the humanitarian sector, that in the adaptation space, that would be able to, it's been extremely hard to put a dollar value on how much loss and damage is happening. I mean, if I just put the climate risk perspective and what is needed to adapt, we're looking at 350 billion annually by 2030. And this is going to escalate even more in trillions by 2050 when climate change intensifies. Which countries are supporting? I think there's a collective agreement that this fund should be set up. There's a genuine commitment by both developing and developed countries to actually accelerate the setup of fund and new funding arrangements. And there is a definite push from particularly the LDC and the most vulnerable countries and SIDS for the use of non-grant instruments so that countries are not put in debt.
Okay, thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left. Hubert, I see your hand up. Maybe you can ask your questions very short and precise, and then we have a couple of questions actually coming into the chat. Thanks, colleagues. But Hubert, please go first.
Okay, thank you so much. So I want to know about the loss and damage supervision. So because, for example, in East Africa in last month, there have been a flood that has been destroyed the infrastructure. The most of people, they have died. So still now some people, they are claiming that they didn't get assistance from the government or international organizations. So I want to know if the UNEP or UNFCCC, they have the supervisory bodies which is responsible for supervising how the fund is used, or if the people who are suffered from the loss and damage, they get the funds, because sometimes the fund may be used incorrectly. So just I want to know if there is that kind of team or supervisory bodies about loss and damage funds.
Great. Thank you, Hubert. And we will combine that with the question, what is the current state of discussions on eligibility criteria for accessing the fund that goes in a similar direction? Alvin.
Okay, Matthews, I wasn't sure whether that particular question is directed to me and if there's anyone else who wants to take that. I'll attempt to answer that. In terms of eligibility, I think it's very much open at the moment in terms of what eligibility criteria would be set in place. But Hubert, one of the things that has been the context of why the fund is being set up is that in the case of, especially for cases like in East Africa, where there is a flood, within 24 to 48 hours, such a fund should be set up, which could be readily mobilized to address those disasters. But in addition to that, the preventive measures, a large part of lives can be saved if preventive measures like early warning or forecast-based financing and investment into prevention is really quite important in terms of saving lives. And so it is highly likely that the focus of the fund would also have a preventive element, and that incentivizes preventive approaches such as the ones. In terms of fiduciary standards, in terms of eligibility criteria, it's very early to say what sort of eligibility criteria would be used for such a fund. What I have definitely heard from member states is that all countries should be able to, and particularly all developing countries should be able to access these funds, particularly the most vulnerable ones, such as Africa and SIDS. And another thing that has cropped up is enhanced access, and particularly enhanced access for community-based organizations. If micro grants or small grants could be set up in place that provides the ease of access to such funds. I hope I've answered that question.
Yes, thank you. So there are a couple of questions that can probably be tackled pretty quickly. Will the fund cover loss and damage also in agriculture, which is a major problem in many vulnerable communities in the world? I think the answer is yes there. Arvin, probably we can tackle that very quickly.
We see from the national adaptation plans that UNEP is supporting the key priority sectors. The most vulnerable climate productive sectors are agriculture, water, coast, cities. So it is most likely that, you know, and depending on country priorities as well, how the fund would be channeled in terms of looking at loss. Loss in the agricultural sector is very, very interesting. It's both economic and non-economic. In the case of Philippines, for example, we've seen huge migration from smallholder farmers as a result of recurrent droughts and floods. So definitely, you know, agriculture would be a key focus. Also around application of different instruments for agriculture, parametric index insurance, where there's a highly established range of instruments and highly developed instruments in the agriculture sector could be scaled up for use. The Horn of Africa addressing droughts, you know, that's a classic case. So happy to take on, you know, this discussion offline in terms of agriculture work.
Very good, thank you. I think there's one sort of recommendation or idea in your direction, Alvin, to take away. One user has said, or one participant, environmental and ecological economists have been working with valuation issues for more than 30 years. Has the Green GDP initiative been approached? So this is probably something just for you to take away from this call. We will not discuss this in depth at this point. Maybe as we need to close, because we've reached the end of our time here, let me ask one final question. One participant was interested in the question to say, will the fund only have voluntary contributions, or is there some kind of structural standards contributions also planned, like regular replenishments or something like that?
Definitely, there has been some discussion around the range of financing instruments that, or range of different options that could be considered in terms of financing. So the traditional model of finance under the financial mechanism of the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement has been voluntary contribution from developed countries. From a justice perspective, that has been the argument that voluntary grant instruments, voluntary contributions from developed country forms large part of this to enable maximization of grant instruments. Other instruments and other funding arrangements has been shared. I understand that there, you know, in some countries, loss and damage or national climate funds have been set up where taxation system have been used. So, you know, that could be a range of another instrument at the national level. Parallel to that, of course, not forgetting Global Shield that has been convened and that provides some level of buffer. Another range of instruments has been taxation as well, and the SG has been quite vocal on this in terms of taxing fossil fuel high emitting industries, and that forms a part of contribution towards such a fund. It's still quite early in the early days, you know, where the funds would be coming from. In my expert opinion, I would probably say from the experience of different financing instruments or the financial mechanism under the convention, a consistent source of revenue, such as innovative taxation, or I don't want to say taxation, maybe a levy, could be considered, so that there's a consistent pool of funds, and that would also help address the scale of loss and damage across different geographies and regions. And just to add to this, one of the COP decisions was for the Secretary General to convene the MDBs around the reform of the financial architecture that would, back to back, of course, with the Bridgetown agenda around how MDBs could help address loss and damage, and particularly using low concessional loans that would help address loss and damage, climate-related loss and damage.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Alvin. We really appreciate that in the middle of the busy Bonn days of SB 58, you were taking the time to present to us and help us learn more about loss and damage and climate justice. Thank you, colleagues, for joining today. We will close at this point, and please observe your emails coming from the Faith for Earth Secretariat to invite you to the next thematic consultation in the process up to COP28. And Alvin, all the best for you. We thank you for your great work, and keep in mind that there are people of faith all over the world. 80% of the world's population is identifying as people of faith. Thanks for speaking to us, and we have an echo here, but we will close at this point, and have a great rest of your day or evening, colleagues, or night. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.